This story comes from a book called Cold Case Christianity for Kids, which is written by a real-life police detective by the name of J. Warner Wallace. You can learn even more about how to think like a detective by going to his website, casemakersacademy.com. As detectives, Jeffries booms out in his big voice the next week, we have two possible ways to find out where this skateboard came from. First, we could try to find a witness who was there when the skateboard was placed in the shed. Witness evidence is called direct evidence. What if there wasn't a witness, you ask? Jeffrey smiles like he's glad to hear the question. Well, then we'll have to use indirect evidence. Indirect evidence is also called circumstantial evidence. I think I've heard about that, says Hannah. It's not as good as a witness, right? Not true, Jeffries replies. We didn't have a witness last week, but we were able to figure out that the skateboard was old. We used circumstantial evidence. The skateboard's location, the sticker, the cobwebs, that was all circumstantial evidence. Jeffries looks at Daniel. I asked Daniel to do some investigating for me this week. Yes, sir, replies Daniel, standing to his feet. I went to Great Skates, which is our only local shop for skateboards, and the owner, Mr. Martin, says these are large 75mm wheels, and they're used for speed. He's the only guy who sold skateboards with these wheels 10 years ago, and they're not made anymore. Daniel sits back down. Good work, Daniel. So now we have even more indirect or circumstantial evidence that the skateboard is old. By the way, I was in the crime lab all day with no windows, but I knew it was raining outside. How? One of my assistants came in. I knew she had just arrived and I saw big drops of water on her coat and hair. She could have told me it was raining outside, and that would have been direct evidence, but I didn't need her to say anything. The indirect evidence of the water drops and her wet hair was more than enough. See the difference? Jeffries asks, scanning the cadets. You say, can we talk a little bit more about Jesus' case? Sure, go ahead. I was thinking about God and miracles this week. It seems to me that if God is real, then miracles can happen. I get that, but how are we supposed to collect evidence about God, even indirect evidence? He's invisible. Jeffries smiles. This is a perfect example for this week's lesson. Indirect evidence can be powerful, and we do have indirect evidence for God. A lot of it, actually. Everyone is paying attention now. Indirect evidence of God? Asked Daniel. Where? Jeffries walks up to the whiteboard. Let's make a circumstantial evidence diagram as we list the evidence for God. He starts to draw. You turn towards Daniel and say, I didn't realise detectives have to be artists. Jeffries overhears you and says, well, better to be an artist than a con artist. Everyone laughs. This won't be difficult to sketch out. The first piece of circumstantial evidence you already know. We're in a universe that began to exist, just like we talked about before. What made it begin? Well, whatever it is, would have to be something outside of space, time and matter. And we know that God fits that description. Jeffries draws a set of falling dominoes on the board as a symbol of a universe that starts to exist. Next, scientists tell us that the universe is incredibly fine-tuned for the existence of life. This means that the laws of nature and physics are amazingly delicate. One slight change and there would be no life. And not any universe like we have either. Like if the Earth was a tiny bit closer to the sun, we'd all burn up. Or if it was a tiny bit further away from the sun, we'd all freeze to death. This is just one example out of 40 or 50 I could give you of the perfect fine-tuning of our solar system and universe. Scientists have no idea why this is the case, unless of course the universe was designed deliberately and it had a purpose to be the home for human beings like you and me. And it seems reasonable that if there is a God, he would design the universe this way, if he created us like a loving father would. He draws a designer's compass on the board as a symbol of the fine-tuning of the universe. And there's more. Scientists also see signs of design in biology. Your body is incredibly designed, and you even have information in your body called DNA. and he draws a DNA molecule on the board. The DNA molecule is an instruction manual for your body. It contains design information for all of your body, and it's got more information than all the books in the school library. Now, information is a sure sign of intelligence. Jeffries picks up the skateboard. On the bottom of the board, he finds the small stamped set of words. Take a look at these. Made in USA. How do you think they got there? Hannah quickly raises her hand. Well, that's easy. Someone put them there. Probably the company that made the board. Well, couldn't they have just landed here by accident? I don't think that sounds like a reasonable conclusion, answers Hannah. I agree. In fact, information like this sentence always comes from an intelligent mind. You can't get this simple sentence from chance or the laws of physics. When you see information, you know it was caused by intelligence. In this case, it was by the people who made the board. He points to the DNA molecule on the whiteboard. The information in this molecule is billions of times more complex than that little sentence made in the USA. Whatever created the information in DNA would have to be lots smarter. If there is a God, he would be the most intelligent being ever, right? He could easily create the information and design we see in our DNA. Jeffries draws a microscope on the board as a symbol to remind them of the design inside biology. Jeffries looks at his watch. Okay, one more thought for today. Now, as a police officer, I know it's never okay to steal something. It belongs to someone else. But where does that kind of rule come from? Is it just a matter of opinion? Does it just come from our government? Hannah says, yes, I think it does. What if the government didn't have a law about stealing? Would that make it okay to steal? All the students think quietly about this question. What about if most people thought that stealing was okay? Would it be right or wrong? The students chat for a moment, and they agree it wouldn't be okay to steal even if there wasn't a law against stealing. All right then, continues Jeffries. So, if stealing is always wrong, even if most people think it's okay, then it must be a moral law that is built into the universe. But where did that law come from? It must have come from the person who made the universe. This is another piece of circumstantial evidence. Moral law. The detective draws 2 stone tablets on the whiteboard symbolizing the 10 commandments of God. And now the picture is complete. See, here we have 4 different types of circumstantial evidence. The fact that the universe began to exist, the fact that the universe is very carefully tuned, perfect for life, the fact that there's so much information in every cell that has DNA, and the fact that there are moral truths that are bigger than us. All of them are evidence that points to God. So we don't actually have to have direct evidence because we have enough circumstantial evidence. The conclusion that God exists is the most reasonable conclusion to explain all of this circumstantial evidence. The students look around at each other and think about what Detective Jeffries has just said.